What's your number one tip for, say, staying safe when you're in the wilderness?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. And I would honestly have to say my number one tip for staying safe is not any piece of gear, not even an emergency communication system. I think that in some ways that could potentially make you more reckless if it gives you a false sense of security and you start taking risks you really shouldn't take. So I would say the number one thing you can stay safe, it is your mind. It's what's up here. You have to be smart and responsible, and above all, you have to err on the side of caution. People who describe themselves as like adrenaline junkies, they make me nervous, and I don't want to be in a canoe with them. I think you have to be really cautious. Is there going to be lightning tonight? If there is, you better not be camping on any sort of high ground or by a big exposed rock face. Are you absolutely sure you can get around that big point in the lake? Maybe it's better because of the waves and the wind just to portage, cut across the point rather than try to round it. These rapids, maybe if it's a Sunday afternoon back home with your friends, and it's a warm July day, you can run them. But out here, water's cold, you're very isolated, you're tired because you've been paddling for 7-8 hours before you even got to this point. Your canoe's pretty heavily loaded. I say don't go through them. Go along the shore. And that's kind of like talking to myself on my journey. I would always say, things like slow and steady wins the race. Adam, let's take this one step at a time. Keep your eye on the prize. It's getting to the end. You got to be careful here. Be cautious. And I think that if you have that mindset where you're almost like the anti-adrenaline junkie, be slow, be careful. The risks are relatively low. And traveling by canoe in the wilderness or hiking is a pastime that's very enjoyable. And it's something that almost anyone can do of any background, any age, and really take a lot of pleasure out of it and really have a lot of stress come off their shoulders because they're doing something that doesn't have to be crazy and dangerous. The George River, I didn't really know this because I'd focused most of my efforts on the earlier part of my route, but apparently a lot of canoeists have drowned on this river. I read online that 9 canoeists have drowned in relatively recent years alone on the George River, apparently 7 in a single incident. And
how difficult a river is it?
Well, that's just it. So I was like, wow, I know its reputation, that it has this fearsome reputation that you could easily die there because of the cold conditions and just many, 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 many dozens of rapids. There's just tons and tons of rapids on this river. But I would have to say that it's not a particularly dangerous river as far as northern rivers go. I mean, it's not exactly a novice river either, but there are certainly far more dangerous rivers. Like on my journey across the Arctic, I would say the Hanbury River is far more treacherous than the George River. And I think that's partly why it's this mental side that I'm talking about when I say that your mind is your best asset in terms of staying safe. And I could see exactly why so many people have drowned trying to canoe the George River, which is there are numerous rapids on it that are completely easy and they're fun. I mean, you could take like a summer camp down them with no trouble. But therein lies the danger. If you spend all day and even a week paddling relatively easy rapids, it lulls you into this false sense of security where you start to think, oh, I'm actually pretty good. I'm getting the hang of this white water thing. Here's another long stretch of rapids. Let's nail it. We're almost at the end. This will be a nice send off for the journey. Great end to the trip, right? Because they're all pretty much harmless. They're just big waves. You can plow through them. But sometimes hidden in those long stretches would be something really nasty. It's like, yeah, there's a 3-kilometer stretch of rapids, 95% of which is pretty easy and straightforward, but buried towards the end there is a dangerous ledge where there's a really dangerous undertow or there's a big drop and you can't see it until you're right over it. And the shoreline's often treacherous there where there's no easy way to actually get out of the river because of rocks and things. So I could see how, people just got overconfident and thought everything's going to be a breeze. We can just keep going. And even me, knowing the dangers and knowing people had drowned there, it's so easy in those circumstances when the black flies are bad and you just want to get a few miles further along where you're like, I think I can do it. I think I can get through this next set of rapids. And rapids, I don't know about your experience, but to me, they always seem smaller from the outside than when you get into the heart of them. Yeah. It's like, wow, those waves are a lot bigger now that I'm actually in them than they looked from on shore way over there. So it's really easy to make a mistake. But if you can resist that temptation, if you can make the smart decision, then the risks are quite minimal and you really have nothing to fear. so long as you don't do anything stupid and put yourself in harm's way. So that's why I always say, your best asset, it is your mind. Just, never get panicky, never make impulsive decisions. Just be smart, take it slow. It's not a race, and you'll be fine. I did that on the Great Lakes. I mean, Lake Erie, my most dangerous moments on the entire journey were within the first week on Lake Erie, especially towards the end of Lake Erie. There are just such large swells, and the weather was cold. This past April, and there was actually snow squalls around April 26th, 27th when I was off Port Coburn, and I had to get around the break wall there. And that was a whole nother dimension, all the human-made objects. Some of the break walls on the Great Lakes, as I discovered, you can't avoid them. They extend like a kilometer offshore, they're just like a straight concrete barrier going a kilometer offshore where they have a canal for the ships. And you can't, I was like, well, maybe just go over them. Well, no, you can't go over them. They're just concrete blocks. They're vertical that rise straight out of the water. So you have to paddle in your canoe all the way around these break walls. And, the swells would be bad. There'd be huge waves. They could easily do damage to me. Water's freezing cold. So sometimes I'd be like, okay, well, I'm just going to find the most comfortable spot I can on this Lake Erie beach and spend all day here, getting caught up on my notebook until this wind dies down, and then I'll continue. So I did that a few times where I would just be spending a lot more time on shore than I really would have liked. But I was like, I'm just going to play it safe. If I have to get up at 4 a.m. when the wind has died, I'll do that and paddle until 10, and then I'll stop at 10 in the morning. And if I have to wait on shore for another 6 hours until the evening, I'll continue in the evening. So all along both Erie and Ontario, I was frequently windbound on shore because I didn't want to risk it going out.
Well, on those big lakes, it really is like Gordon Lightfoot said. The legend lives on from the Chippewa down about the big lake they call Gitchagumi. Like if that can sink the bloody Edmund Fitzgerald, it can sink you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the waves are massive.